welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing another mystery art doll challenge. Back when we did my bearded dragon, I had a lot of you suggesting to do snakes, and I had a ton of different options, and I didn't want to just pick one, so instead I put all of them in a cup, and we're going to see which one we're going to do today. So, like I said, I think I have like 10 or more names in here. I put 2 in there because I thought these 2 snakes would be kind of interesting, but all of these are suggestions from you guys. So let's see what we get. The cup's kind of fuller than normal. Okay. I got one and only one. Okay, put that back. Ooh, this could be fun. We are going to be doing a... Let me see if you guys can read that. Okay, there we go. Now you can read it. Okay, so we're going to be doing a diamondback rattler snake. That's going to be so much fun. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so the first thing that we're going to work on for our diamondback is going to be the clay pieces. Now I don't have a whole lot of clay pieces to make, thankfully, so we just need to focus on making the head and then the rattle. So the first thing that we need is we need a base to build everything off of. So I made this out of tinfoil and I made a piece for the head and for the tail. For my head, I basically made an arrowhead shape and I glued it to the bottom of my glass container, that way I have something to hold on to. And then for the tail, I just made a very long flat piece and I did the same thing and glued it to the bottom of a glass container. So now that we have a tinfoil base to work with, we need to start covering it up in clay. So I made a bunch of strips of clay and I'm just going to be wrapping it around my tinfoil, and then once everything is completely covered, we're going to blend all of this together until we have a smooth surface. Once you have your base nice and smooth, we can start marking out where our features are going to go. Now because I didn't know what snake I was going to end up making or what size or anything, I didn't have glass eyes ordered for this, so what I'm going to end up doing is just use some beads and we're going to end up painting over these. And this is kind of a simple hack if you don't have glass eyes, but you want to make sure your eyes are nice and round, and sometimes when you're sculpting your eyes out of clay, you really can't get them perfectly round, so it just helps to get some cheap glass beads and then put them into the clay face and paint over them. And because you're going to be painting over these, it really doesn't matter what color they are unless you want some of the color of the bead to show through. The main thing you want to focus on is making sure that they're safe to go in the oven. And most glass beads have no trouble, you just want to make sure that they're not plastic, because some plastic beads do feel a lot like glass, so you want to make sure that they're marked as glass when you're buying them or ordering them. And then once we have the eyes in position and we know we like where they're at, we can start focusing on making the mouth. So we're just going to kind of roughly sketch out some lines, make sure they're even on both sides. Unless you want to have a weird expression, you mainly want to have everything nice and even. Once you know that the lines are where you want them, you can start digging in a little bit more and refining the shape of them, and then we can start using our tools to make scales around the lips. Now when I started sculpting the scales, I started with the front of the face and I realized I needed to make some nostril holes and I needed to also make some pit holes. Now one thing I realized with making these hyper-realistic reptiles is to not really define every individual scale. It just gets too messy and busy. So it kind of helps to just mark out the main features really nice and defined, and then the other scales can be a little bit more abstract. This kind of helps me have a more flat surface to work on for the painting, and then I can add more detail with that. Now this clay head actually took me a lot longer than I thought it would since it's so small, but I wanted to get all the details in and make it just as accurate as possible. So after I'm done with all the details, I'm happy with how the face looks. I'm going to clean up the edging and take it off of the glass container, and we're going to end up baking this in the oven at probably 275 Fahrenheit for roughly about 45 minutes. Now I am going to be baking the head and the tail together, but I wanted to make sure that you knew how much to bake the head for. I'll repeat it later when we get to the tail. Now the rattle is actually going to be quite easy. We mainly just need to focus on dividing it into the individual sections. So I'm going to get everything completely covered in clay, smooth it out, and then start shaping it. Once I have a pretty decent shape, I'm going to start adding more detail to it. So I'm going to start adding some grooves and stuff, and then we can start adding the sections. Now at this point I realized my rattle looks a little bit more like a tiny dagger than an actual rattle, but we do need to add a lot more line work to it, so hopefully once we get to the end it doesn't look like our snake has a sword at the end of its tail. So I'm going to break our dagger up into a bunch of sections and start rounding them off a little bit, and I think by then it'll look a lot better. Okay, so I'm finally happy with my rattle. I added some texture and stuff to it. It looks really good. I just need to clean up the edges and we can put this in the oven with the head for roughly about 45 to 55 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. Once everything is done baking and is cooled to touch, we can start painting our clay pieces. Now the painting for these hyper-realistic reptiles, I realized takes a lot more layering than I usually work with. Normally I put like 1 or 2 layers down, I adjust the shades and stuff, but to get these to look super realistic, I'm doing like 5 to 6 different layers of colors on top of each other to get the colors correct. And I think it's good for me to start doing that because I want to start doing this with other creatures, not just realistic creatures, but maybe even add more of a realistic feel to my fantasy creatures. I don't know if this is going to get picked up or not, but there is a baby bird that lives now outside of our window around where I record my audio, and usually this is the most quiet room, but if you guys hear chirping, that's because there is a baby bird right now outside of my window and I can't do anything about it. Anyways, the first thing we need to do for painting our face is going to be starting off with a primer. So I'm going to start off with kind of a very light khaki color, and then we're going to start adding some shadows to the nostril, pit holes, and then even around the mouth. We're going to blend it in so it has a nice fade. Also, doing this adds a nice graying effect to certain areas of the face that I want to be slightly darker, and when we add other colors to this, it'll help create more of a natural feel as well. So again, most of the painting for the face is just trying to get the colors correct, and there's a lot of blending in this to make sure everything fades nicely, and then after we have the main colors down, we can start adding more defined features like individual scales and highlights. Also, with adding the colors, I'm not going immediately to the bright colors. I'm going to be adding those last after I lay out where I want everything to go. So everything's going to be a lot more muted until we get to the end, and then I can start adding more bright colors to the face. And then the last detail that I decided to do was paint the eyes. So I started darkening them up, I gradually added more richer browns to them, we did a slit pupil down the middle, and then I started adding a highlight to it. And of course, while I'm painting this, I'm kind of getting paint on the rest of the face around it, so I did have to kind of fix up the scales around the eyes. But after that, I was really happy with how everything looks, so I'm going to put this aside to dry, and then we're going to start working on the rattle. So for the rattle has very simple colors. It kind of fades from a dark color to a lighter color. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be painting it the main color that's kind of in the middle, and then we're going to start darkening the bottom and lightening the top. At this point, I realized that our rattle, which originally started off as a tiny dagger, has now transformed into a piece of corn. So that's a thing. Anyways, after our little tiny corn dried, we can start adding some black to the base of it and fading that upwards. After that, I'm going to start darkening up the cracks. We're going to blend this into the rest of the paint, and then if you want, you can wipe away any excess paint if you don't want it to be so dark, and we can also go over this and add kind of a frosted highlight. So we're going to make sure both of our clay pieces are fully dried, and then we're going to paint over this with a layer of resin to lock in the paint and help protect it. This is going to have to cure overnight, so while that's curing, we can start on our sewing. Now for the sewing, I'm actually going to be using a very simple pattern. I decided to make it a tiny bit more complex because normally if I was doing a snake, I'd just make a long strip that tapers off, but I want to add some curves to it without having it wrinkle when it's curved. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw out a curved pattern for the body of the snake. So right now I have a bunch of pieces of paper taped together, and I'm going to use my pens and pencils and markers and just whatever I have laying around, and I'm going to draw out the shape that I want the snake. Now while I'm drawing out my pattern, I do want to keep into account that I want this to be life-sized, so I made sure to look up the average size for a diamondback, and it's roughly about 4 feet. So I'm going to keep that into account, and then after I have everything scribbled up, I'm going to kind of measure it, make sure I have the right size for it, adjust it here and there, and then we can cut this out and use this to cut our fabric out. So technically my pattern is not 4 feet long, but if you were to make it straight, it would be. Now for the body of our snake, we're going to need a top and a bottom. I'm going to leave it pretty simple, we're just going to sew these both together. But before we do that, I need to add some detail to both sides. So for the bottom, what I'm going to be doing is on the back side of my fabric is I drew out a bunch of lines to make the scoots for the belly. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing down these lines to have those lines sewn into place. I didn't really feel like painting them on, I really wanted to just sew them on, and I know this probably took me a lot longer than painting, but I think it was well worth it and it looks a lot better. And then for the top of the body, we're going to be using the same fabric as the belly, except we're going to have a layer of sequins over this. So what we need to do is we need to take the fabric for the top of the body that we already have cut out. We're going to pin this to our sequins fabric, and then we're going to sew all the way around, combining the 2 layers of fabric together. Once we have the sequins sewn into place, now we need to take our top and our bottom, sandwich those together, and we're going to sew down the sides of them, combining them together. Now while doing this on the curves of the snake, I'm going to leave 2 openings. That way it's going to be a lot easier to flip our fabric right side out and to stuff it and even add a wire frame to it. Now you would think that flipping this right side out wouldn't be that bad, but because we have a lot of thin areas and we have a lot of curves, it's just going to be easier if we give ourselves extra holes to work with, so we don't have to flip everything out all at once. Anyways, after we get everything flipped right side out, we're going to add a wire down the whole body of the snake, and then we're going to stuff the whole body of the snake. After we have the body stuffed, we can start adding our clay pieces to it. So I'm going to start with the head, and we're going to glue it onto the wire first, and then we're going to take the fabric for the neck, and we're going to start gluing it around the base of the head. Then we can turn our snake around and we can add the rattle to it. So we're basically doing the same thing that we did with adding the head. We're gluing the rattle to the wire first, and then we're gluing the fabric around the base of the rattle. We're going to let all of our glue dry for a little bit, and then the last thing we need to do is we need to paint our markings onto the sequins. Now I am going to add a little bit of painting to the belly. I'm going to brighten it up a little bit, but we're not going to do much more than that. We're mainly going to be focusing on the top. Now we're not going to start by painting the diamonds down the back of the snake first. We're going to add those kind of last. We want to get all the undertones painted first. So I'm going to add some brighter khakis, almost an orange color to it, and we're even going to add some browns and stuff. So after we get the undertones kind of adjusted here and there, we're going to move on to the tail a little bit. We need to add some black stripes going down the tail, and then we also need to add a little bit of white in between those black stripes. And then after that, I think all the undertones look really nice, so we're going to start painting our diamond pattern. Now you don't have to have all of these the same size. It'll actually make it look better if you make some larger, some smaller. They don't all have to connect. Just try and mess around with what looks right to you. And then after we have those marked out, I'm just going to add a little bit of a white highlight around them, and I'm going to let this dry, and then we're all done. Okay guys, and that is our mystery snake, the diamondback rattler. I had so much fun with this project. I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so check the links down below if you want to buy anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!